My name's Leonard Kozianski. I'm an artist. This is my studio. Welcome to my studio. This is where I work every day. And what I've noticed is that sometimes when I'm making a painting, I'll have two or three ideas competing in my mind for attention. And they'll get themselves mixed up in a single painting. And then somewhere along the line, I discover the confusion. I feel pulled in one direction or another, and then I have to make a decision as to which of the ideas I'm going to go with and which ones I have to reject. Or maybe not reject, but save for another painting. Because sometimes if you have too many ideas competing for attention in a single painting, then no one idea has a chance to stand out. And so that was the case with this one we're going to with the painting we're going to talk about today, which is called Nocturne in Blue on Thin Ice. Here's the painting. This is the painting. It's an oil painting. It's 42 inches high by 26 inches wide. It's a winter scene. And it's a sort of a very blue painting with a few warm highlights. But it wasn't that way all the way through. And so let's look at how this painting evolved over time and see maybe some of the ideas that were competing for attention and how I had to decide which idea I was going to go with and which idea I would leave for another picture. It was a winter scene, and I'm inspired by the winter scenes of Peter Bruegel. This is one of his. It's called A Winter Landscape with a Bird Trap, and you can see that bird trap over there on the right, and the people skating on the canal over there on the left. And playing what looks it looks like hockey, but what it really is it's a precursor of the game of golf. So I wanted to do a winter painting, ice skating. I grew up on a pond, and I did ice skating in the winter, and it was a lot of fun. It was very natural. You're outside, but it was also a nighttime painting and a nocturne. And here, this is a painting by Whistler, done in 1785. It's called Nocturne in Grey and Gold. And it's a section of London at night. And so, the whole idea of a nocturne appealed to me too. So a winter painting, like we saw in the Bruegel, and a nocturne at the same time, like we see in this Whistler. And so I began the painting, as I began so many of my paintings, with a drawing in my sketchbook, with pen and ink, just to get an idea of what the composition is going to be. And so this was the first compositional study I came up with. And, it was good. I liked it. But it was a little bit confusing. Something wasn't quite right about it. I loved the foreground. I loved the background. In fact, I had used that type of background in a previous image, which may be why I included it here. But the two ideas didn't seem to be in harmony with each other. And, here's that background area where, we have the houses and the church, and, it's like a town behind the central scene. And that just seemed to be too much. It was just pulling too much attention away from the center of focus. So, this was the study that I eventually went with. And, it's right next to the first study. And so I just kind of jumped over to the other side of the page. I started drawing, and instead of having a town in the background, I just had like a forest, woods, with a couple of little houses there. But what I noticed was that, I didn't have quite enough room. So I had to go up to the top of the page where the spiral binding was, and then even go beyond that. And, sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you're doing a drawing and it's not quite the right size on the sketchbook, so you end up, taping pieces of paper to the side of the sketchbook page so you can continue the drawing over to the side, or in this case, going up to the top, going past the spiral binding. And, well, here was the drawing that I eventually ended up with and that I ended up making a painting from. And you can see I drew a pencil grid over the top of it to help expand it to a larger format. Because, the sketch is just about this big, and the painting I wanted to make was much larger. Kind of about the same size as that painting back there. So here, this is the study that I worked from, and started off, as I start all my paintings, with a charcoal drawing on the canvas using vine charcoal. And then after that vine charcoal drawing is done, then I go over it with ink. And here you can see some video that I did from a different painting, but just to demonstrate the process of going over those charcoal lines, those vine charcoal lines with ink, water-based ink, because I want to spread a tone over the top of that. And then because it's water-based ink, I can then wipe a turpentine-based tone over the top of it, sort of creating a single color for the whole canvas. And then that way I'm not painting on white. I'm painting on a color, and so I get a reaction of color and value right away. Otherwise, if I'm painting on white, then everything is a constant process of darkening, and the white has a tendency to bleed intensity out of the colors. So that's why I like working on a toned surface. And here, this was how the painting began. And I had a couple of cardinals in the foreground. They were red. And you can see that tone. If you look over at the church, the windows on the church and the door of the church, that's that brown tone showing through. And I painted everything else over the top of it. And I was looking at this painting, I'm thinking, something's bothering me about this. I don't like this painting. It's just bothering me. What's the problem here? And the problem was that the birds were a little too distracting. They were taking all the attention away from the rest of the picture. So I changed them to blue jays, and that really solved the problem, because then it became a painting about blue. It was a blue nocturne, a night scene. And as we saw in that Whistler painting, to make a night scene, what's really important is that you sort of have a general overall color tonality that's punctuated by some light, bright colors, which become the focus of attention. And in this case, having a red sweater on the skater and the bright lights coming out of the house provided the focus in this very blue, dark, nighttime-y landscape, this winterscape. I had to decide that, well, the cardinals, I like the cardinals. Those are great birds, and I love having red in a painting like that. But it was an idea that belonged in maybe a different painting. If this was going to be a nocturne in blue, then I couldn't have such dominant red shapes in the foreground pulling all of our attention to the foreground and preventing us from seeing the rest of the picture. Here we can see that, we look into the background, it's very wooded. And so, it gives it kind of a little bit of an ominous quality, having all that deep, dark woods surrounding the house, and we can sort of go back into the woods only so far. We only want to go so far. We don't want to go too far. And we look back there, and we can see that pack of dogs running through the forest. Kind of wild things at night. And so that's part of the theme of the picture, was the contrast between sort of the civilized house and skater and sort of that deep, dark, sort of uncivilized, maybe threatening background. And so here, we see that foreground area with the skater and with that the house with the open door and the windows, the light pouring out onto the snow, onto the ice. We can see that hole in the ice. That came a little bit later. That was an addition, a detail that seemed to make sense, seemed to be in harmony with the whole theme of this painting. In the beginning, when the ice just forms, you're very careful. But after a while, after you've been skating on the ice for a while, and then the weather starts to warm up again, it can get a little thin in spots. And there can be holes, cracks. In fact, I myself fell through a hole in the ice at one time. Again, near the end of the season, as the ice is beginning to thin, as it's beginning to thaw. And so here we get a little closer look at that doorway. There's the dog standing in the doorway. The dog is kind of a wild element. You know, dogs are sort of halfway between civilized and uncivilized, the natural and the civilized. And then behind the dog, we look into the room, we can see the dog's bowls on the floor there. Okay, so if we're going to keep dogs, then we have to feed them. You know, out in nature, like that pack of dogs that we saw, well, those dogs, they feed on whatever they find. They're predators. But this dog is domesticated. And so this dog has to be fed, has to be given water, has to be taken care of. And here's that hole in the ice. Like I said, I fell through the ice once. You know, I was just skating along, and I reached this one patch, and it was a little bit snowy, and boom, all of a sudden, I'm in the water. And, you know, luckily I threw out my arms and caught the ice as I was falling down because I never went under. But, you know, that's a real scary experience. And it's really cold. And so I came out of that hole dripping wet in the wintertime. Luckily, home was nearby, so I could change my clothes. But notice that ice, when it starts to thaw, when it starts to crack, you sort of get these spiderweb kind of patterns. You know, as things drop on the ice or as people step on the ice, you know, you can get those cracks and they radiate out, you know, in these sort of like spiderweb patterns. And so that was kind of interesting. I'm not going to say it was fun to paint. It was interesting to paint. It was a challenge that I really enjoyed. It was a detail that added a lot to the picture and, you know, made it an enjoyable experience for me to paint, to have to create something that I had never created before on the surface of a canvas. And so there was the finished painting. A nocturne in blue. It was a nocturne, a winter scene, an ice skating scene, and, you know, it's overall blue in tonality, punctuated by these sort of bright, warm lights. The lights from the house shining on the ice, the skater with the red sweater, and, you know, some of the windows that are illuminated. You know, there's a little bit of there's a light shining on the church and on the roofs of the houses from the side. And so I wanted to create that contrast in this painting between sort of the warmth of domesticated life, of home life, versus sort of the somewhat beautiful, but maybe a little bit threatening quality of the nature which can surround us. And so then when the painting was done, I had to frame it, box it, and then after it was boxed, I had to put a label on it and then put it on a plane out to California where it was exhibited by one of my favorite galleries, the Willott Gallery out in California, and they sold it to an interested collector. So all in all, it was a very interesting experience, a little bit conflicted. You know, I had reached a point in the painting where you know, I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't happy with it. There were too many ideas in the painting all at once, and I had to make a decision as to which idea was going to predominate and which one would have to be saved for another time. And if you wouldn't mind, you know, write a comment. I read all the comments. I try to answer most of them, and they help me. They encourage me to make more of these videos, which hopefully help you to make more paintings on your own.
If you like this video, be sure to subscribe, like, and share.
And don't forget to ring the bell.